So what am I going to do for you? I've got about 25 minutes to really help you think about the broader context in which we're trying to build intelligent cities, lay out the fiber and technology infrastructure for tomorrow's city. Because it gets very easy to focus on the technology piece, the physical laying of cables, the installation of infrastructure, and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes we can forget what that was the answer to. You know, what was the question? What was the purpose we're trying to create for our city? What's the soul of the city we're trying to build? What kind of place are we trying to build for people to live in? So what I'm going to focus on in these 25 minutes is really getting you to help get you think about that. And if we take as a time scale 20 years, which is roughly what most of us talk about in the investment cases when we're talking about building these infrastructures, then I also want you to think about what might be happening in the next 20 years so that we make sure that when we're planning for the future, we're not planning based on what's happening right now, but we're planning based for a range of possibilities that might come up. And that's why, you know, the images on the screen are very deliberately chosen. One is we're moving into a world which is all about ideas, but actually we're also cracking the way the brain has ideas. So we could be by 2030 in a situation where we are communicating our ideas to each other wirelessly. And the other is that in a world where speed has now become so important and action has become so important, what's really critical now is wisdom. Is the wisdom to sit back and reflect on what we really want in a world where we're going to be confronted by so much choice. So who's your Yoda? That would be my question to you. In your organizations, who is it we turn to? Who do we give permission to ask the difficult questions, to challenge us and to ask why we're really doing things rather than just spending the money, which is the easy bit now. And we know that we're in a world where the new normal is just a phenomenal place, in a sense, of uncertainty. We know things are speeding up, business cycles are getting shorter, economic wealth and power are shifting eastwards across the planet, and science and technology are disrupting literally everything we understand. We also know that we've reached what you might call an event horizon, where we are looking at, for the first time in peacetime, a situation where the majority of our children could be unemployed long term. That is a phenomenal situation. We're also looking at the possibility that that generation could never die. If you look at what's happening around aging and immortality research, and I'll come back on that. And so we're starting to face up some real issues. On the one hand, we have these wonderfully bright, techno-optimistic views of the future, but on the other hand, no jobs and no prospects for these people. So one of the things we have to look at is, where are the seeds of hope around how do we deal with that stuff? And you look at projects like Street Kids International, which is taking kids off the street, literally, who would turn to crime and prostitution in all sorts of cities around the world, and helping them learn the skills they need to run their own businesses by going out and interviewing street vendors. So they might only be selling orange juice or biscuits, but you're changing their prospects. From an economic perspective, what they generate is a rounding error on a rounding error. But what they stop in terms of crime and the loss to society is massive. And they're creating a fabric. Here, closer to home, you look at someone like Apps for Good, who are taking the kids who are basically truanting from schools and teaching them how to learn again through the vehicle of creating apps for things they're interested in. And bringing in people who are, in their eyes, real, who are doing this for real on the street, and teaching them how to do this stuff. And we need to start tapping into those kinds of things and saying, do we have that civic infrastructure in our cities? Do we have that civic infrastructure in our towns that are reaching the people most marginalized and helping them reconceive of what their life is going to be in the world we're moving into? Because we're moving so fast that the state and local authorities just won't have the resources to fund that. So we've got some real challenges there. We also know that speed is now critical. If you look at how long it took, the US got colour television in 1953. When did the UK get it? 1967, 14 years. Now, technologies are launched globally and they're available to all of us globally. There is no time lag. Wherever you are in the world, this stuff is happening. And increasingly, this stuff is happening in what we used to call the developing world and rolling back. So we've got to learn how to scan what's coming and have that early warning system, but also learn how to make decisions, how to experiment, and how to accept that an awful lot of what we deliver is in beta. You talk to people in the software world now, and they say, if you deliver a 100% finished solution, you're 6 months to a year too late. We have to put things out and let the world test them and feed back to us. We also know that disruptive is now the name of the game. Everyone is now trying to seek disruptive innovations, and we have these wonderful programs like the X Prize Foundation, who are encouraging people to come up with truly disruptive solutions to real-world challenges. This one I like just because most people know it. Anyone here a Trekkie? Anyone watch Star Trek? Come on, you can know that, you're amongst friends and about 50 other people. In Star Trek, they have this wonderful device that the Doc uses, which can scan your body, heal everything from a cold to a broken leg with this scanner. Well, these guys have actually got a competition to create one of those. A multiple function device that will fix all sorts of problems. And they've got over 30 teams around the world who don't know it's not possible to do that. And so they're going for it, and they're building this, and there's a significant prize. And one of the things that these challenge programs are doing now is just encouraging people to say, let's go for it. Let's not be bound by history. Let's not be bound by anything else. Let's just see if we can make things happen. But what that means is they're not respecting the rules of how we used to do things in our organizations, the traditional way industries and government works. They're just coming up with solutions, which then creates great disruption because the solution comes to market far faster than our understanding about how to deal with it. We also know that all the old orthodoxies are being challenged. So this is a hotel building in China, a 30-story hotel built in 360 hours. Because these guys said, actually, we can't wait for the normal timescales. If we wait 3 years to build a hotel, the demand may well have gone. So actually, once we've laid the foundation, how do we get it up as quickly as possible? And they've changed the whole way you construct now. So basically, everything is put together like a Lego structure. All the cabling, everything is built into these prefabricated solutions in the factory, and then on site, they're just plugging it together. They're building the tallest building in the world right now, and they were going to build it in 90 days. The Chinese government has just put a stop to that because they went, wow, that's a bit scary. Maybe we need a bit more research to prove that this won't fall down. But you're seeing people just challenge the whole way we do things. You're also seeing the pace of acceleration just going off the pace of automation going off the scale, with the people doing that not really worrying about the social consequences. So in China, Foxconn, the manufacturer of iPhones and iPads, who, you remember a couple of years ago, they had all those problems around employee suicides. Well, their solution is to actually buy 1 million robots and put them all across their production lines, basically replace the humans. So you're looking at a situation now where the pace of change is going to be phenomenal, and how people deal with economic uncertainty is increasingly turning to automation to take humans out of the loop. So we know that, yes, new industries will emerge and create new jobs. The problem is they're not going to emerge at the same time as the people needing those jobs who are being replaced by technology. So we have to have foresight to recognize this is coming and say, what are we doing to help create the environment where new jobs will be generated to absorb those people who are, if you like, taken out by technology. We also know that those boundaries between what we used to think of as magic and science are just disappearing. So one of Google's biggest projects right now is to upload the human brain, a project where we will literally be able to transfer everything we know onto the internet. And they reckon it will be the biggest single revenue earner in history, because literally all of us will be renting real estate space to put our brains up there. If we were worried about what the NSA could do just looking at our Facebook activity, imagine the possibilities when everything we know, everything we think is online. There's a guy called Ray Kurzweil who's behind the Singularity Movement, who's been hired as their Director of Engineering to do that. And then we know there's a huge amount going on around human enhancement, all sorts of science and technology being applied to enhance the human body. We also know that some really different paradigms are emerging in terms of how we do things. So civic infrastructure, we're still having this nonsense debate about high-speed 2 and whether we should have it or not, and whether it's going to benefit society by getting to Leeds 20 minutes quicker. And then you've got people who are really thinking differently. So Elon Musk, the guy behind PayPal and behind, I can't remember the name of the cars now, one of the new green vehicle out there, he's actually created this design for a pneumatic tube, basically, that would take you from LA to San Francisco in 40 minutes. So London to Birmingham in about 25. And it's basically just whacks you through this tube at speed. But this would cost about 1/10 of the equivalent rail infrastructure. And you wouldn't need to dig any holes, you'd basically build it above existing roadways. The guy has funded the design and put it out on the internet for anyone in the world to pick up and run with. And who's picking up and running with it? People in emerging countries. The West has taken a very arrogant view that says, no, that doesn't work for us. But you look at places like Abu Dhabi, people in the Middle East and Asia, and they're all going, brilliant. This will give us the kind of infrastructure we need, and we'll get it at a fraction of the cost. We're also, we know autonomous vehicles are with us. Google have now driven over 1 million miles in their driverless cars. They're now legal in 3 states around the world. And we're talking about people going into production with these between 2015 and 2017. Will change the whole way we drive. You will actually be dangerous if you're not driving, if you're trying to drive a manual car, because the technology driving the driverless vehicle is just so much faster in responding. So we could end up with legislation within 10 years that basically says every car has to be retrofitted in order to reduce insurance costs. If you're in the insurance industry, it's a bit of an interesting challenge, because before you might insure 2 million people a year. But if a driverless vehicle fails, that's not driver error, that's product failure, which means you only have one customer, who's the manufacturer. So suddenly, as an insurance industry, you have to get your head around moving from selling to 1 million people plus to selling to one, and creating a product fit, which is why none of the insurance companies have yet worked out how to even structure this product. We also know that at a personal level, our technologies are evolving rapidly. So most of us remember, we had desktops, and then we had those luggable devices, and then James Bond in Tomorrow Never Dies introduced us to the first smartphone, where he could open his car, start the engine, fire missiles and everything from his smartphone. And then we moved to where we are now today with Google Glass and all sorts of things going on, wearable technologies, more and more devices coming to market where we're going to wear them, clothing that monitors our health, Fitbits, Nike fuel bands that monitor every step we take, every calorie we eat. We're seeing, we can already buy headsets like the Epoch headset, which you train to monitor your brainwaves and basically start to understand your commands like up, down, open, close, so you can control a computer without touching the keyboard. We already have those. So we can see why, wearable technology is just exploding, and you look at the products coming to market, the number of people who are bringing the equivalent of Google Glass to market in the next couple of years is phenomenal. But what's really interesting is what's going to happen next. If you look at what Apple and Samsung and others are patenting right now, it's all implanted and embedded technologies. So by 2015 to 2020, you'll start to see devices emerging. We already have cochlear implants, optical implants, all sorts of bits of technology in us. But the next generation is that we'll start to have optical amplifiers, hearing amplifiers, mobile phones. All of these things will start to be embedded very, very quickly. What worries me is that most of society is not thinking about any of this kind of stuff. You talk to people in airports and they just panic. What are we going to do when someone presents to security and they've got 8 embedded devices? We don't open them up. We have a certificate for each one saying what it is. They're just not prepared for it, and they're all making investments now in security technology that they think will last them 20 years. But it doesn't end there, because if you look at the research going on in the labs right now, we know what we're looking at is the idea of actually using the information processing network already in our body, our nervous system and our genetic communication system, to transmit and receive data directly to the body. DARPA in the States, the US Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, has a project to actually graft nanotransmitters and nanoreceivers directly onto our brain cells, and they're demonstrating the prototype of that next year. So the speed of this stuff is just going to come at us very quickly, and if we're not gearing our organizations to think and act at speed, then we're kind of sowing in the conditions of failure. And finally, we know that literally everything's going to be totally connected, and you're going to hear a lot about the Internet of Things over these 2 days. But literally every item of clothing, every piece of food we eat, within 5 to 10 years, everything is going to be digitally connected or will have the potential to be. So how we manage that, how we make use of that data is critical. We also know artificial intelligence is going to be embedded in more and more things. Already today, this is a trivial example, but if you go to McDonald's in a drive-in, they know with 80% certainty what you're going to order. Any idea why they know that? What they base that on? Image recognition of your car. They're using artificial intelligence and some deep probabilistic rules to work out what you're going to buy just based on what vehicle you're traveling in. Which is quite interesting, because they're trying to cut time out of the process. But you're seeing AI penetrating every walk of life. IBM developed a computer called Watson, which is an artificial intelligence program. It won a game show competition in the US called Jeopardy. And it didn't just win, it won it hands down against the two leading Jeopardy players of all time. But now that computer, having proved it in that game, is now being used in medical diagnosis. And it will outperform cancer doctors, the leading cancer doctors, because when it sees a set of symptoms, it literally goes off and looks at every single case ever recorded in history and does the best fit pattern match, but also provides a better care plan because it's looking at your needs and again matching against outcomes and people's situations from the past, and it's coming up with a better diagnosis and a better care plan. So you've now got patients actually saying, I don't want to talk to a human, I want to talk to Watson. Because Watson listens to me and does what I need rather than what you think I need. And so AI is going to be there, we'll have artificial intelligence agents. You've already heard Mohammed talk about how you've got a virtual assistant here. Well, it won't be long before that virtual assistant is translating into multiple languages and is also intelligently interpreting what you're saying and coming back and offering context-sensitive advice. I mean, this stuff is moving very fast again. We know that also, so we're very conscious that all of that stuff will take away jobs in all sorts of industries. So the question is, well, where will the new jobs come from? And one of the areas is obviously the kind of rate of advance in science and technology. And we know that this kind of convergence of nanotechnology, biotechnology, IT, and the cognitive sciences is just throwing up all sorts of possibilities. Vehicles where the body parts will actually have memory, so they'll reform after an accident, they'll reshape themselves. Products that can literally be engineered down at the atomic level to have the precise function they want. So really taking advantage of the promise of nanotechnology. So these things are coming, and that's all very exciting. The problem is they're coming in a different place to the jobs that are being displaced by some of this technology and automation. So one of the challenges is how do we prepare for the future? Both the existing workforce, but also those going through the system. And one of the things we've got to understand is that this science and technology is moving at a phenomenal pace. So whilst a lot of us are sitting there wrestling with the idea of should we move from Windows 7 to Windows 8 in our organization, you've also got some of the leading research scientists in the world being funded to create immortality by 2045. There's a Russian billionaire called Dmitry Itskov who has this initiative, and he's pulled all these Nobel Prize winners together, so people who are generally seen as being reasonably rational, to work on this. And the goals are, firstly, to have a robot by 2020 where you can control it directly with a brain-computer interface, and it will be doing your bidding, if you like, in the world. So it will be doing your shopping while you're sat at home or whatever. And there's one of the Japanese professor who's working on this already sends his robot avatar to deliver lectures on his behalf. He stays in his office in Tokyo, the robot goes off to Kyoto, delivers the lecture, and he does the Q&A via the robot. But 2015, he's putting robotic teaching assistants into Japanese schools that will provide context-sensitive responses to the children. The next stage of development is the idea of transferring our brain, so mapping the human brain and literally transferring it into your robot when you die. The third stage is then understanding how consciousness works and transferring that. And the fourth stage is this idea of creating true immortality, where we'll exist as a sort of hologram-like beam of light. No one has a clue what that looks like or what that would mean for society if literally we never died. But these guys are working on it. And they've got a bunch of spiritualists and religious leaders trying to work alongside them to work out what the societal impacts of this might mean and what this means for kind of all that we take for granted. But this stuff is happening right alongside, us debating about whether we should have another traffic light or, are we going to have 2 megabit or 4 megabit? We've got to understand that this stuff is going on and isn't paying attention to how quickly we're moving. It's just moving at pace. And so, what we know is that there are possibilities and there are opportunities, but science and technology really sits at the heart of that new agenda. So we did some research for government a couple of years ago looking at, well, what are those new professions that are emerging or that could become more prominent as a result of advances in science and technology? And we picked out 2 groups. One group were those that are science-based, where, in a sense, you need a lot of scientific expertise to do the job. And they're largely new professions that most of us wouldn't have thought about. Climate change reversal, body part maker, etc. where you're already starting to see the signs of some of these. I mean, today you can already have a bionic limb, if you want, that's more functional than the human hand. The wrist will rotate, the fingers will rotate. It's got finer motor skills than most of us have. You have the whole thing designed by an artist and engineered for you. It's cost you about 50 grand. So, we know that's already happening, and just the price will drop, and we'll start to see people doing it for cosmetic reasons and actually saying, to make me more functional, I actually want a bionic limb. And then there's about 20 that we identified that we saw were science enabled. I.e., you don't need a lot of science to do the job, but they require a lot of science underneath to make that happen. So we can see that there's a lot of interesting professions, but the question is, what are we doing to prepare people for those? What are we doing in terms of education? And that's where we sort of have a bit of a problem, because the UK is nestling somewhere near in the bottom third of the OECD table. And if we truly think that we want to have competitive advantage through science and technology, engineering and maths, then and literacy in general, then that has to become a priority going forwards. And there is some hope. I mean, there are some great initiatives going on, and people starting to understand that the new education agenda needs to be very different. That the skills we need to be equipping people with are very different than the ones that form the curriculum today. Sadly, Michael Gove and some of those people running education at the moment don't quite get this, but soon they're beginning to understand that rote learning isn't necessarily what our kids need anymore. That actually they can do an awful lot of their learning at home and then come back into the classroom to be facilitated to understand what it means and how to apply it to problem solving. And you're seeing some really good examples of people getting that. So Bidwell Training Center, Pittsburgh in the US, this was a place where basically unemployed steel workers, illiterate single parents, people who've never worked before, people who've never been in education before, were going and basically being left to sort of fester, not really getting good qualifications. They brought this guy, Bill Strickland, in to try and transform it. And Strickland's view was, if you want to change the way people are educated, you have to demonstrate that you believe in them. So he basically modeled the place on Harvard and went around and said, what does Harvard have? What gives people a sense of belonging at Harvard? So the first thing he actually put in was a fountain. People thought, you're crazy, you need classrooms. But he actually said, no, what we want there. The second thing he did was build a theatre where he got some of the best musicians in the world, jazz and blues musicians, to come and perform for his students. So they started to believe in them. He created programs in all sorts of things, in chemical technology, in craft skills. He was called in by Heinz, and they said, we've seen what you've done with these chemical technicians, where you're taking people off the street and turning them into technicians who can work in our labs in a year. Can you do the same with food technologists? And he said, no, because we're not really in that business. And they said, well, what if we gave you $1 million? And he said, welcome to the food world. and now people are just getting him to set these centers up all around the States, just based on installing a belief in people who've never really been educated before. You're seeing a phenomenal amount of stuff happening on the web, like the Khan Academy and the massively open online courses where people are now accessing educational content from the world's leading universities and schools and content providers for free. We're also seeing people create very new models. So Microsoft have created this concept of the school of the future, where you're not going in to be taught in the classroom, you're going in to solve problems. And they're using a technique called epistemic games, where you basically get people to play roles around a whole set of problems, whether it's city infrastructure, dealing with crises, and you get the kids to learn the skills and the questions they need to be answering in order to solve problems. So they actually learn by solving problems, which I think is an incredible, smart thing to do when we need to teach people how to survive in the world we're moving into. And at the city level, we're seeing some really quite interesting stuff. So Rotterdam has set itself this goal of being a phenomenally sustainable city, 50% climate change, reduction in CO2 emissions by 2025. It recognises sea levels rising. It's actually got this whole project going on to create floating cities. So by 2040, they reckon that something like 40% of all the housing stock and all the building stock will be built in these floating cities, which they're already prototyping. They also recognise that the government can't fund infrastructure anymore, so they now crowdfund physical infrastructure. This is a bridge where the citizens have actually put the money up to build the bridge, which I think is quite an interesting way of getting infrastructure built. Well, for you guys. And then, Malmo is another one. So not every city is starting from scratch or from a good position. Malmo had a situation where a whole bunch of industries were in decline, docks and everything. They basically said, we need to envisage a very different future, a green one and a knowledge-based one. So they decided they were going to become an academic centre, a green centre, so they have targets around things like 100% recycling, complete green infrastructure, solar power powering everything, and they have community-driven projects. So largely it's 16 to 25-year-old girls who go out and do community consultation about what the community thinks you should do next, and they do the prioritisation of the projects for city change. Lots of really interesting ones I haven't got time to go through, but everywhere we look now, we're just seeing very interesting examples of people doing innovative stuff. Singapore setting itself the target of, by 2030, having water consumption of about 40% of what the US consumes today. The guys in Curitiba, Brazil, a recycling scheme where for every 4 kilos of material you recycle, you get 1 kilo of organic produce created by local farmers. So you've got a sort of sustainable ecosystem being developed there. Sydney creating events, so when the city's quiet, during quiet periods, creating creative cultural events that then fill the city, but bring people in, but also build a reputation around it being a centre for creative activity. Some of the other things we're seeing is this recognition that with so many people going out of work so quickly in the next couple of years, we actually need to pioneer accelerated learning. We need to find ways of helping people acquire new skills quickly. We need to develop real foresight. We need to be able to scan what's coming next. This is for travel and tourism, it doesn't really matter. We need to build that picture of what are the kind of likely developments, and then from here we can build various scenarios about what else might happen. But unless we have that 20 to 30 year outlook, how do we know that the choices we're making are the right ones for the future? We need those kind of breakthrough innovations like the ones I talked about with the X Prize tricorder. This is one they did 2 years ago to create vehicles that would do 100 miles per gallon. You need to start new infrastructure thinking, like funding it through crowdsourcing, like accelerated delivery. What Singapore's working on now is the idea of infrastructure as they go. So literally you bolt it together, you replace it, it self-monitors, it self-heals, it self-repairs. That's their vision for a sustainable infrastructure model. We also need to find new ways of funding things, whether it's funding assets, whether it's funding innovation, whether it's the way we charge for goods and services. We've got to incubate the new business models for a world where people might not have as much money. And we've got to encourage people to go out and take responsibility for creating the jobs, because they're not all going to be created by big business. It's very clear that the industries of the future, the big players today, the Googles, the Apples, the Microsofts, don't employ anywhere near as many people as the equivalent companies who were top of the the New York Stock Exchange 100, 10, 15 years ago. So we have to grow a huge pool of innovative startups that are going to employ people in much smaller numbers, and we have to create the conditions for that. So mapping a future, the world we're moving into, yes, it's about technology, but it's about a lot more. And I think, I think kind of get a sense from what I've put up there. I'm not going to go through all of it. But I think we really have to kind of recognize that we are at a real tipping point, and we have to start making some very bright choices around how we create the conditions for the future. Graham Greene, the author, says there comes a time in everyone's life when you have to open the door and let the future in. I think the kind of coming potential crisis in the global economy that could get triggered by the end of this week if the US defaults is actually an opportunity to do that, to start to think about what do we really want for the future, rather than simply trying to fix the problems of the past. Thank you.